this. So anyway, your best metric, and folks, I am videoing this because I'm going to share some data that I've generated for the article that of Dennis's metric here and his best index. So Dennis, why don't you introduce the best again, catch people up, and then we'll talk about the figures that are in those two articles at Science of Fantasy Football.
Yeah, the whole concept of this index was how many times does this player help your best ball score sheet? And while that's hard to know on any given year because you don't know what your roster looks like, I
Right.
made some simple assumptions. And what I said was, okay, how many times did this player exceed the typical historic mean for a position? Um, you know, we know from studying data, if you look at all the quarterbacks and you with a 6 point for touchdown scoring system, or whatever scoring system you want to use for quarterbacks, we know what a historic median of the data is for any given position.
Dennis, for 4 points with my counts over median, I use, I think, 19.
Yeah, and
And I don't know for a 6 point, I guess probably in the low 20s if I had just, adding 2 points to that.
correct.
Just,
So what I did, Professor, was pretty simple. Is I said, okay, it's gonna be around 21.5.
okay,
So
that
what I
sounds right.
so what I did to make it easier on me
Mhm.
to do the analysis, because wherever you set the bar, as long as the bar is even for every player,
Yes.
the rating that you get by position, and we're not looking at quarterbacks compared to running backs here. We don't care. We're just looking at the individual positions. How did this guy do? As long as you set the bar the same for every player and continue to do that for every season that you're looking at the data, you have that working for you. So to
Gotcha.
round it off to make it easier, I use 20 points for a quarterback in a 6 point for touchdown, whether
Mhm.
he's running or passing it. I used 20 points as the first bar. And then I said, I'm giving him another point for that week if he clears 10 over that bar. So 30-point week. So using that system, a perfect score would be 34. Nobody has a perfect score. But we can see on your chart here what the
Yeah.
distribution is. And the distribution is fairly tight on who scores enough points to make your score sheet, hit your score sheet using this best index, using that methodology. Of course, the best score for a week on this would be 0. The highest, or I'm saying the worst score for a week
0.
would be 0, and the best would be 2. So 16 weeks to the fantasy football season, you'd be 32 points, would be the most your guy could have. Now, I do include week 17 because it's another data point. I understand that it's not going to be a data point played by every player, but I do use all 17 weeks. So that's how I got to it. 34 is the max. But you can see the best quarterback only hit the scoreboard 21 out of that possible 34 points. And that was Josh Allen. And he was indeed one of the outliers to do that.
Yeah, so what I did, you can look at the article, folks, and this is a box and whisker of your data that Dennis sent to the editor, and then he sent it to me. And so from 21 to Anthony Richardson at 3. So that was the upper and lower here. And of course, there's injury there with Richardson, for instance. But anyway, it gives you an idea. And so, Dennis, what I did was hit the old box and whisker population analysis. And anything above 14 is in the upper 25%. Anything below 9 is in the lower 25. So you got the extreme highs and lows. Uh, I have found in system analysis, those tell you a lot more than you might think. So that's what I pay attention to. So on this figure that in the article, I highlighted the player in green if they were above 14 or red if they were below 9. And notice there's a lot of players kind of in the middle. And so in one way, you just kind of look at a general kind of painting of players. So you kind of have really good, and really bad. And so, as you would probably predict, most quarterbacks are in kind of the middle here. I don't know if, for instance, Mahomes at 13 is any different. I know you might with Wilson at 12, Dennis, or Stroud at 12. I mean, to me, that's 1 point difference. I'm not really going to carve that up. I just kind of group them together. I get a little worried about Dobbs at 9. It's close to that lower limit. Yeah, you may have to play a little bit with your analysis. But anyway, that's what I did for all the positions. And here's the quarterback. I don't know if you want to comment on the quarterback distribution or whatnot.
Yeah, the first thing that jumped out to me is some of the guys that didn't get hurt that had bad seasons. Look at Justin Fields, only hitting the board 8 times, and he played the majority of the games
Yeah, that was
versus a guy
sad.
like
Yeah.
versus a guy like Kirk Cousins who was up there. Now, Matthew Stafford was another interesting one because everybody was raving about the great fantasy football season that he had. He stayed healthy. So in points, total points scored, he had a pretty decent season. But if you look at his fantasy football season and how many times he would have hit your score sheet, he's right there with Derek Carr and Geno Smith, who people aren't raving about. Meanwhile, CJ Stroud had this great rookie season that has vaulted him up to QB1 in Dynasty Fantasy Football, according to Keep Trade Cut website. And he was almost identical to Russell Wilson, who was out of a job
And Baker Mayfield.
by week
Yeah.
15, and Baker Mayfield.
And Herbert. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was
he's kind of, he's average.
Yeah. So what this tells me, as I'm looking at this, if we knew that this was going to be the distribution, where we were fairly confident who the top 6 quarterbacks were going to be, we're pretty confident who that middle group was going to be, and we're confident that the bad group was going to be filled with this many players. Now, taking injury out of it, okay, because we can't predict injuries no matter how much we think we can do that. So we're mainly looking at the upper end and the middle guys that stayed healthy. My strategy is I want one really good quarterback in best ball, and then I want 2 others from somewhere in that pack. If I could do that, I'd be all set. And look at last year, Dak and Jordan Love, both guys that were underdrafted, that both performed almost as well as the guys going in the early rounds, the earliest rounds as quarterbacks. So there's values to be had here. But here's the thing, Professor. Mm-hmm. If I missed on those big guys and I got 3 picks from, let's say, Goff, I got Stroud, and I got Baker Mayfield, I'm going to be okay in best ball. I'm not going to have a huge deficit versus the guys that got maybe Josh Allen and then got Burrow or Fields or somebody who underperformed. So maybe the strategy decision in best ball, looking at this data and the data actually was fairly consistent from one year to the next. If you look at the breakdown, there were 2 guys in that 20 plus group last year. There were 4 of them the year before, and there were 6 the year before that. So the data suggests that maybe that's, maybe 4 or 5 is what we can expect in that top group. So if you don't get one of those top guys, don't take the next best quarterback too early. Wait a few rounds and take 3 of the other guys in pretty quick succession. And I think you do pretty good in best ball fantasy football.
So just to go through the top last year were Allen, Hurts, Prescott, Love, Purdy, and Jackson were above the box, as it were. So they're in the top 25 percentile in your index. Uh, I don't believe those are QB 1 to 6 in ADPs right now at all. I
No.
think, yeah. So I would think people need to look at that and consider. I mean, I'm not saying here it is, 13th of April. This is, this is all I need, in August. This is just a beginning research. But if Love or Purdy is not in, the upper aspects of quarterback ADPs, then the question I would have is why not, or what am I missing, or what is the index? In other words, why is the index showing us something that happened last year? Can it happen again, or is this just who's right, the public or your index? I guess, and you've got to have something to for judgment. But right now with best ball, uh, if you could grab a Prescott and Love, can you imagine? I mean, if they can come up close to your best index, man, that'd be 2 solid players versus an Allen, and maybe hope that Murray or Burrow come back, and I mean, if you add them together, and I don't know if I'm sure you thought about this, that'd be Prescott and Love would have been 36. Allen and Cousins would be 30. That would imply that tandem was a little less than having Prescott and Love. It certainly last year it would have worked in your favor a little more. So have you thought about the additive, kind of mixing and kind of pairing? I mean, I'll see some articles about pairing. Is this the way the index might be investigated?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great idea for strategy decisions as well. For instance, if I got, by luck of the draw, I was in the right position of the draft and I got Allen and Hurts on the same team.
Wow.
Okay. I know based on the numbers from the last couple of years and what I'm expecting of them. And of course, I'm going to make a forecast of what I expect their best to be for 24.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I've got those guys up there at 20 apiece for my 2024 forecast, and I get them both because Hertz is dropping in ADP, and I get it where I'm drafting. Maybe I'm drafting one guy a little bit earlier than the other, so I'm getting Allen at the maybe I'm just taking Allen at the end of the second. I'm getting Hertz at the start at the first pick in the third. I'm taking them back to back on the in the draft. Just happened to flow that way for me. Now I've got 40 on the board.
Right.
I know historically that's a huge number. I'm not going to take a third quarterback with that team. Maybe not until late.
That's a great idea, actually.
Yeah. Versus
yeah.
Now I miss on those 2 guys. Now I'm
so
taking.
You get let's say Mahomes and Lawrence. That's 26. Maybe you do need.
I need a third quarterback,
guy, like a Stafford.
Yeah, correct.
Right. That'd be a 33. That
So,
would keep you in the game with 3.
Correct.
I see.
And that's how I'm
about that.
That's how I'm going to play my strategy at quarterback of saying, and again, this is very similar to my strategy in redraft for years. Okay.
Okay.
In
Okay.
redraft, if I miss on a top quarterback,
Mm-hmm.
I take two pretty quick back to back with each other. And last year, it just so happened that
Yeah.
two of the guys that I was taking
Mm-hmm.
in later rounds back to back were Dak Prescott and Jordan Love. So
Nice.
you could get them cheaper. They were coming later, and here's the thing too is I take this figure and I turned it into almost like an ERA in baseball. Okay. So based on games played,
Mm-hmm.
I know what that figure is. And I equate it to a 17 game season so I can see what the full number would have been. And if you do that, Kirk Cousins is up there in that 20 range. Okay. If he would have stayed healthy and continued to perform at the level he did, he was a 20 pointer last year. So I know that I've got the forecasting down that I think we can get an idea
I like that.
of what's going on. And that will lead to some strategy decisions. Now, this will be beta tested this
Yeah.
season
Sure.
and I'll beta test the garbage out of it in best ball. But I think there's an application in redraft as well, because all this is telling you is how many weeks a guy hits the scoreboard for you, which is kind of important even in redraft. And because it's another way of looking at a consistency score on a weekly basis. This is just saying, hey, look, I'm giving a bonus to the guys that really did well. And I'm not caring about their bad weeks because the only difference really between this and my MVP index is MVP subtracts the bad weeks. And in here, I don't care what the bad weeks were
Right.
because the bad weeks get thrown away. Now, in redraft and dynasty, where you're setting a lineup, they don't get thrown away. But I still think this best index will have some interesting ramifications for how to draft other formats than best ball. But I certainly did like the way that the quarterback data
Mhm.
instantly saw where I can apply that logic because injuries are a little bit more rare at quarterback than they are at running back. And that's kind of why I think you can apply that strategy of being additive as a method. Do I have enough quarterbacks yet? Well, I've got a best of 50. That's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
I don't need that third guy, or I don't need I certainly don't need a fourth. But I think that is a strategy decision that will play itself out in best ball for sure.
So before we go to the running backs here, it occurs to me as somebody that tries to figure out systems that if you applied this across a team and look at the team level, just to kind of, okay, you got a best index quarterback of this. What does that mean for the wide receivers? What did they do? And there's multiple ways that you can look at that. And I'm doing that. I'm working on that question from a different way, different perspective. Dennis is aware of our secret stuff, and I know you're doing at the team level. I don't know if we'll ever reveal that, or you may have to pay us a little money to see that. But I'm just trying to bring whatever people are doing as a metric, realize that it's a team level is part of the equation, and understanding. For instance, some of my data shows there's a big difference in what Arizona did last year versus Atlanta. If you look at quarterback versus wide receiver versus Atlanta, uh, with running backs, I mean, everybody knows this, but when you see the data, Bijan Robinson was the whole show for Atlanta. Murray and Connor and Trey McBride were a little bit more balanced for Arizona. He actually had issues with his wide receivers. Marquise Brown didn't live up to that weekly scoring aspect that you would need. He needs, and I know he's been traded, but so it's a story of two teams. And I think if you look at the team level on some of these metrics, I think there's some secrets there. And I just don't know if we're going to talk about that, Dennis. But uh, what's your comment about that?
Yeah, it's funny, Professor, because we have had the discussion off the air when we're just talking about things before and after the podcast of understanding that in any research on anything, whether it's horse racing, whether it's handicapping of NFL games versus the spread or prop bets or whatever,
Yep.
or it's fantasy football, there comes a point where your data is so much better than the consensus that you do not want to remove your edge as a player in these games.
Yeah.
Versus unless you're getting,
Something back.
compensated
Yeah.
for that. So yeah, I do believe that we are stumbling across some things, because I think if we look at a quarterback, let's say a changing team,
Right.
like Atlanta this year, where Kirk Cousins, if he comes back healthy, we kind of know historically he's always been in that 15 to 18 range for best. Now, if we look at other quarterbacks with a 15 to 18 best and an average tight end, for
Right.
instance, where does that put Drake London's score? London has had a 10 as a career best average or best index last year, with a quarterback that was a 6. So
Yeah.
now we triple the quarterback's effectiveness. What does that mean
Yeah.
to the wide receiver results? And I don't know the answer yet.
No,
That's the
and
research.
that's systems analysis. That's where,
Correct.
and just folks, just if you're serious about this, you need multiple approaches to look at something. And I'm
And
doing
yeah,
multiple ways of answering that question, Dennis. You and I are approaching it differently.
yes, and that's it. That is a big key, Professor, and that's why, even though my weekly value scores that are calculated and have been doing that now for 7 years, they will continue to be calculated. Forecasts of that will continue to be made. The MVP index was a different way to look at consistency, and that will continue to go forward. And it was very successful last year in beta testing of that concept. Now, even though I've been successful with weekly values and MVP, that didn't stop me from thinking. That didn't stop me from trying to come up with even better ways to do that. And that's how Best was born. Is Best going to take over as the number one tool? Maybe not. Maybe it's just that additional tool in the tool belt to get the right job done. But what has been interesting with Best is at quarterback. If I look back in history over the last 6 years at every rookie quarterback and look at how they improved the next season, and of course you can only look at rookies that were starting versus rookies that were starting, about a +6 seems to be the answer. So I know when I try to forecast CJ Stroud for this year, +6 from last year might be a good place
That
for
put
him to
him in
settle in.
that would put him in the top 5.
Correct. So that's where I'm looking at this tool as other forecast schemes, but each position with Best has to be handled a little bit different. And the running back population was really apparent with that, because boy, you've got some really great running backs, and then you've got the rest of the league.
Yeah, so I have this figure from your article. Who was the best? And we always love that. Who was the best and introducing the best index. So all this is out there for folks to look at. I even included the figure. Sometimes I like to hide those because that's the fun stuff to stare at it for a while. But the distribution, Dennis, was the high was 28 CMC, and the next was 20. 8 point difference, Dennis. CMC is sometimes they're so far off the chart. It's like Secretariat, the racehorse, so far out off that you can't even judge, mortals by you can't judge all horses against Secretariat. They'll all lose. Secretariat, by the way, when they dissected, and I know it's biology, Secretariat's heart is the biggest. This guy, one of the famous vets in Kentucky, did a necropsy on Secretariat. Secretariat had the biggest heart he'd ever seen in his career. So you wonder about those kind of things. Oh, in other words, are we measuring something about, the fast twitch muscles and CMC, just the genetics of that man just got so lucky, all the, the nutrients, the training, the genetic, everything worked. Will there be somebody at a 28 ever again as a running back? I mean, we're talking historically. What'd be nice if we had the Hall of Fame running backs and could look at the best. And
Oh,
we could,
yes.
wouldn't that be just for fun's sake, kind of the best that ever was? Where do people like, people argue about that, right? In horse racing, I've seen they would put all the horses in one race. Where would they finish? It'd be Secretariat, and then the rest were running for second place, kind of thing. And so CMC was 28, then Brees Hall at 20. So that might be a surprise. I mean, if we just were slave to the numbers, he would be our RB2 for 24, at least going in. Bijan Robinson and ETN and Mixon and Mostert. How about that? Is your next group. Then Rashad White, Kyron Williams, and old Henry, King Henry at 16. So those are the elites. The sadness, Dennis, poor Swift, we loved him last year. Javonte Williams, Singletaries, those are all 10s. Ramondre Stevenson, 9. Poor Ezekiel Elliott at 9. Zach Moss at 9. And then who's that down at the bottom? I can't see.
I think it's Aaron Jones was
Aaron
at the
Jones at a
bottom. Yep.
7. He was injured though, but so, and then the rest of the running backs we haven't mentioned are in the pack. So I don't know the best way to do this, but again, if you were grabbing CMC and you got, say, Eckler, that would be a 41. Is that enough to carry your team? Probably, maybe. So I like that idea of combining some of these to let you know. In other words, if I grab Kamara and Montgomery and Pacheco, that's what is that? That's 30, 34. So McCaffrey and Eckler are almost the same as 3. Gibbs, Kamara, or I'm sorry, Kamara, Montgomery, and Pacheco. So you need 3 to equal the 2 because you have CMC. That in kind of draft strategy, I'm wondering, and again, the beta test, that's what I would like to look at, the combinations. Can you get away with just 2 solid and then dig for your late your late plays, your injury replacement guys, the backup to the backups to come in and fill during the bye weeks? Is that how we approach running backs in 2024?
Yeah, and I'm not really sure what the answer is. And I think the answer at running back is going to be different than the answer at quarterback because
Probably.
injuries come into such a play. But here's an interesting way of looking at things when it comes to the running back position
Uh-huh.
over the course of the last 6 years, which is the total number of years I've calculated best for. So if you look at the difference between the top of the box and
Yep.
the and and Brees Hall, who was
Yeah.
exceptional.
Yeah.
That's a difference of 20%, right?
It's 4 plus 4.
Correct. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying from 20 to
Yeah.
16, that's
Yeah.
20%
Yeah.
less
Yeah.
than 20. If you look at the number of players who have finished 20% better than Brees Hall over the course of the years, so a 24 or higher over 6 years' time, Professor, that's a population of only 9 occurrences. 3 of those 9, the guy was named Christian McCaffrey. 2 of those 9, it was Austin Eckler. You had 1 Saquon Barkley, 1 Jonathan Taylor, and 1 Todd Gurley. That's how rare it is to be that high in best. And 1/3 of the time, it was Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. If you look at the 10 best seasons, according to the best index, 4 of them are Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
That is crazy to me on how good that guy is. But did you notice that other name the other 2 names that were mentioned are in good situations heading into this fantasy year? What if Saquon Barkley is healthy on a really good offense with Philadelphia?
Barkley got a 13, so
Yes.
he's average
And
last year.
back in 2018 with the Giants, he had a 27. And
Boy,
how
that's
about
a broad difference there.
huge difference, but it shows you what his capability of performance, just like a high buyer's number for a horse in horse racing gets your attention, but can he reproduce that season in and season out? Saquon has not been able to do that. Jonathan Taylor, though, back in 2021, hit 24. And if he can stay healthy, what does he do in 2024? Those guys are ones that I look for the extreme. Austin Eckler hit the chart twice in those 9 appearances of bests of 24 or over, but he's in a vastly different situation in Washington than he was in 2021 and 22 when he had those scores for the LA Chargers. So I look at this data and the first thing that pops out is McCaffrey's a freak, because McCaffrey's usage, his offensive snap usage was down last year compared to where he's been in the past, and yet he continued to hit this best chart with the uncanny frequency. So it's very rare to hit 20 or more in best, and he's done it 4 of his last 6 years. So to me, until further notice, till he shows any sign of father time catching up, he's the RB1.
Yeah. What I would like, the question is age versus best, kind of a decay rate.
Yes.
I would like to see kind of what's the average decay expected. So it's kind of an expectation. So McCaffrey, at some point, does he just keep beating that, and he has to be judged completely differently versus, say, Mixon, who had an 18? What is the expectation for 2024? In other words, if an average decay rate is -3 each year, does that put him at a 15 this year? That's where we need more information, and I don't know that. Or Henry at a 6, does he go to a 13? So that would move Mixon and Henry down to average, if they have a decay rate, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, and that's one thing I am attempting to do, is to figure out where are we with this decay rate. I love that name for it, though. Calling it a decay rate is really a smart idea, because when you compare one player to the next, you can see some patterns that settle in. But how about this? Until he got hurt last year, Aaron Jones's previous 4 seasons
Mhm.
in best index,
Mhm.
16, 15, 17, 17.
So
That's
right there at the edge of great versus really, really good.
and not showing any sign of decay. Um,
Yep.
Adam Thielen at wide receiver has got a similar pattern. So there's some interesting things that I don't think always show up, but we did see it with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. He dropped without any problem with injuries. Okay. He dropped from a 28 to a 20 to a 9 in 3 seasons, and there was no real change in number of games played. So we did see a decay. Now we also saw wide receivers leaving
Yeah.
the team as well. But I think you're right, Professor. I think there's going to be
There's
an
some secrets
ability.
here to figure
There's
this
going to be
out.
there's
Yeah.
going to be an ability to forecast this going into the future based on age, based on experience, where we're going to have some guidelines to say, hey, the typical player
Mhm.
might be 2 or 3 worse on best each season after age 30, whatever. We'll probably be able to get some
So
relationship.
this is secret stuff because I
See,
would like to see the older guys and what their dynamics are versus, the K rate versus the young bucks and what they're, because I think there's going to be some differences and people just hand wave and say, oh, he's old, so he's bad. It's not that way. It's not all or none, Dennis. It's a decay a little bit. It's like your tires are going to wear. It's not like, oh, my
yes.
tires are 2 years old. They suck. No, you can nurse and get some good use. Yeah, if you're going to go from California to New York, maybe that's not, 8-year-old tires, maybe that's a little risky. But you need to understand what is the dynamics of an 8-year-old tire versus a 2-year-old tire. And I don't see that metric out there to where people are looking year to year, team level, year to year. And those kind of questions are, again, if people are paying money, that's the kind of information that I would look for. And I don't see it. It may be behind paywalls, or I suspect those that know are secret and they're playing, the Vegas and the $1 million, FanDuel fantasy games and syndicates. I mean, there's secret stuff and they're not going to tell us what they know. You and I are kind of lifting a little bit to it's kind of like, I'm just walking along and I have no clue. And then all of a sudden something opens up. Say, well, I never even thought that there could be something like that over there. That's what you and I are doing that I don't see any other group that I've seen talk about, "Hey, look over here at this door. You've never noticed this side of the stage before. Oh, well, what is behind that curtain? Is that the great and mighty Oz or not? What is that?" So those are things that I would like to see. And so we are building the tools. That's why I'm so excited because you're doing yours. I'm going in another direction. I mean, they're relay. I mean, we're all stuck to the data, the performance, but I'm doing a little different. And so, Dennis, I don't care if Dennis's best is the best. I'd be great. That would save me time in the future. We are racing with different ways to approach this. We're flipping different rocks in the creek to see where the crawfish are at. Okay. And whoever's grabbing the best, the biggest crawfish, hey, we'll eat your crawfish boil. If you got the little minnow ones, we'll throw those back. So whatever works, Dennis, and that's the bottom line is people can't be stuck on anything they think about. And you see a lot of that on Twitter. People get stuck in their opinions, and Fantasy Receipts flips that card out because people start flapping their chops because I think they're bored. And so, how can I get clicks? Well, I'm going to say this is his season, whatever, or worst ever, best ever, and just make these proclamations to get clicks and it catches up with you. But anyway, shall we move on? Because man, I
Yeah,
didn't realize we could talk about.
yeah,
So
let's go on to wide
wide
receivers.
receivers. Yeah. So take a look at the box. Look how thin. Looks how thin the box is. Look how short. We're talking 12 to 16 is average in your best, and it's a little broader in running backs, just a little bit, 11 to 16, and quarterbacks 9 to 14. So +6, +5, and here is +4. So the wide receivers are starting to kind of jump up on each other, but there are some exceptions. Look at Tyreek Hill at 26. So if somebody had CMC, Tyreek Hill, and Josh Allen last year, that would have
Oh,
been what, the ultimate team? Lamb at 24, Sun God at 23. There are your outliers, Dennis. Those are beyond the whisker. Those are super whiskers. Those three right there. That's the pantheon from last year in your best. They are so far at 23. So again, historically, have you looked at who's 23 and above over the last 5, 6 years? I mean, how many are we talking wide receivers? Have you got that data yet?
absolutely. And here's just one interesting thing: is this really fits with, again, the strategy of what I've said time and time again is elite wide receivers do matter. It's very important to have those elite guys at wide receiver because they pay off, man. They don't get injured as often. Now, last year we did have Chase and Jefferson miss some serious time. So for every sort of rule in fantasy football, there's certainly plenty of exceptions. But if you look at historically, the best data over the last 6 seasons, the absolute best season with that index, 31 by Cooper Kupp in 2021. That's another 20% up. Then it's Tyreek Hill last year. And then you got to go back to Julio Jones in 2018 at 25, Michael Thomas in 2019 at 25, then CeeDee Lamb in 2023 at 24. The only other
So
players
last
over
year we had two historically
two
in the top
historic,
6
correct,
over the last 5. Wow.
correct. And if you look at
And just look at the
20,
Sun God,
yep,
23.
if you look at 23 and above for those seasons, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 seasons altogether over
Right.
23.
So you're starting to come back to the pack at 23. Looks like
23, correct.
24. I'm feeling that's right at that edge of superstar right there at 23.
So 12 people overall,
Mhm.
12 seasons, 3 of them last year. How that's a fourth of the data in 6 years. That's very unusual.
So see, when I see things like that, I get worried because, I'm such a pessimist. I get worried. It's like, wow, we're overestimating what we're going to get out of our wide receivers. I worry that forces us to pay more, like Lamb, Hill, and Brown.
Yes.
I'm worried because it was so rare. Maybe one or two. I mean, we're talking hitting 17, 18 versus the value concept, right? If I have to pay a first pick to get Hill, that's really not really what I want to do, right? I want to pay a second round for Tyreek Hill, that kind of thing
Yes.
when he plays at 20.
Yes.
So that value, it's always the elephant in the room. People squawk, best season ever. Well, that's irrelevant if it's the first running back or wide receiver off the board. That doesn't help me. If you say Hall of Fame season coming, folks, well, that doesn't help me if everybody knows that and is picking him one. That doesn't help my cause.
Well, look at Puka Nakua last year.
Fourth,
Our favorite best ball late round guy
boy.
finished fourth. That is just shows it how out of the world he was, but not too far ahead of him in the draft were Mike Evans and Keenan Allen last year. And you saw where they performed. So
Allen at 18.
yeah.
So how old is Allen compared to the?
Yeah,
Is
and
he the
Allen
old
is
guy
he's the old
compared?
guy in this group, that's for
Is it?
sure.
Is he?
Yeah, he's 30, he'll enter his 32 season this year,
Evans is
and he
what?
was fine. He'll be 29. He'll be entering his age
So
29 season, I
So
believe.
if you looked at age every year, Dennis, in say 17 and above, that I would love to see that. In other words, people talk about wide receivers and age versus running backs. That might be a little quick study. Just curiosity. What's the distribution of age in the top 6 or 7 every year?
Yeah,
Is it
and here,
higher than people think? In other words, are they missing some of these old dogs? I believe you and I have used that to our advantage, that people miss some of these because they get that dynasty mindset in a redraft. And that is
yeah,
not what you want to do.
well, in a dynasty league, a dynasty startup league last year, I grabbed Tyreek Hill and Keenan Allen as my number 1 and 2 wide receivers. I
So
had
you got a 34 out of those guys if you
yeah,
add those scores.
yeah, and
Man,
then
did you win that league? You must have
I
been super competitive.
I only had one guy beat me all season,
He
and
beat you for the
he,
finals,
he
huh?
beat me in the final as well. But the thing is like that's where that random distribution of great games comes in. You
Right.
can't play for that. You can only play
Yeah.
for put me in the top 4 in my league. Get me to the final 4 and
And that's about all. Yeah.
I'll win a majority, I'll win a certain percentage of those games. But if you get into the top 4, and in that same league, I had Michael Pittman, who was at an 18. So I've got some younger guys, and I also had Rashee Rice in that league. So I had 2 old timer wide receivers and 2 of the newer guys, the younger guys. So I'm not going to age out at the position, which is great for dynasty. As long as you layer your ages, you're fine. But here was an interesting piece that I took from this data, Professor.
Mhm.
Remember last year, the big debate: is it Debo? Is it Ayuk? Do I draft Debo? Do I draft Ayuk? They were going almost identical in the draft, and the answer was you
Both.
couldn't miss with either of them.
Yeah.
They were both identically
Was there another
great.
team where they had both?
No, no,
I
great
think that was it.
distribution because you look at AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, there's a separation of 2.
Yeah, that's 32.
Yeah,
Samuel Ayuk was 30, 32.
yeah. So you had these guys that were just
See, I'm
you
wondering if you could look at that at kind of an additive, judge a team, and with ADP, if we calculated with all the trades and everything
Mhm.
flipping, what would that look like? I don't know if that's going to be public data or not, but I would love to see what does a projected team look like with their wide receiver core in 2024 using this index.
And I do have a chart that I'm putting together
I
for
knew
that.
you did. See,
That'll be coming out
are
here
you going
before the
to
draft.
are you going to flip that card for folks?
I'm going to show people what it looks like before the draft. I may not show them what it looks like after the draft.
Okay.
We'll have
Okay.
to decide
Okay.
how nice we're going to be. But let's take a look at tight ends before we wrap things up
Yeah, I
today.
know. Dennis, have you
This is
noticed?
really a big broad area
Yeah,
when it
and
comes to
and
tight end.
so when you look at the elites, look at the whiskers. The whiskers are almost at the box tops. There is no superness. Tight ends, a lot of the way, are about the same in some ways by distribution, right? We only had 2 elite last year, Hawkinson and Kelsey. and two sad Pitts and Freiermuth at a 4. And everybody else was, I mean, you could subdivide the box above or below the median there at 9. So the distribution of tight ends confounds me. You have to judge them differently than all the others. The tight ends are just so weird that way, uh, compared to some of the others here. You don't get any tight end 1 and 2 on the same team that are, the
No,
tops. We had,
no.
since I guess New England with Hernandez and Gronk, might have been the only time you had something, shake and bake with two great tight ends. It's a rarity.
And if you look at this data from last season and also look forward to
Mhm.
next year, Hawkinson is probably not going to be ready week 1. There's a good possibility of that.
Yep,
Kelsey is another year older,
yep.
and then it's all ordinary after that. So
What's been the best tight end in the last 4 or 5 years as far as
so
best?
it's exactly who you expected it to be. it's it
Yeah.
is Travis Kelsey. There's no there's no
Where did Gronk fit, or is that beyond your?
Grok would be towards the tail end of his career, so he
Uh,
would not show up in this. But if I look at tight ends over the course of their career, there's only been 3 times that a tight end has exceeded 20. Okay. And
wow.
there's
We
only
didn't get
been
any of that last year.
no,
15
and there's
was the
only
high.
been 8 seasons where they exceeded 17 or better.
We still didn't
Okay.
get that last year. We
The
had a
top
down year.
over the last 6 years,
Yeah.
the top scores 24 by Kelsey in 20, 22 by Kelsey in 22, and 21 by Kelsey in 18, all even numbered years
Mhm.
out of a weird coincidence. And then the rest of the best of the best,
Right.
Kittle with an 18 in 2018, Kelsey with a 18 in 2019, Darren Waller's big year.
That was
When
a
he was with the Raiders in
yeah.
2020, he hit 17. Mark Andrews in 21 with a 17. And your absolute favorite best ball tight end ever, Zach Ertz, with a 17 back in 2018 for
Yeah.
the Eagles. That's it, folks.
That's it.
That is the population of guys over 15. And the only 2 at 15, Hawkinson last year,
Mhm.
and you guessed it, Travis Kelsey
At
in
14.
2021. So if you look at the total population over of 15 or over
Yeah.
in the last 6 years, that's a population of only 9, and 5 of them are Kelsey.
Yeah. Yeah. He scored a 14, which was second best. So
Yeah.
even in a down year, he was still one of the top 2.
And that was with missing games due to injury. So do we expect Kelsey to bounce back up this year? And because he's a year older and he had a bad season,
Yeah.
does he go a little bit later in ADP? Last year, you had to get him into the first round.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is such a rarity. I've got, when I'm looking at ADP versus end of the season, which we need to circle back around and do the tight ends to finish that series of data, which is out there. I've done the videos. It's on the site, and I've talked about historically. I mean, Kelsey is just going last year in the top, but boy, disappointment. In other words, value wise, going in the first round, you could have got Hawkinson, better later. So Kelsey wasn't a bargain compared to Kittle, Ingram, Njoku, Laporta. Trey McBride. I mean, as far as when you had to buy them, there were other bargains out there.
And that's the big key here is at tight end, you've got a little more injury risk than wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, we see that. And this shows up in the best scores as well. But after that elite guy who's basically a class of his own with what he's done, if you look historically, it probably doesn't pay, according to the best index, it does not pay to overpay
Nope.
at the tight end position. So
Yep.
again, some very interesting data
Yep.
coming out. I'll have another article coming out this week, Professor, in addition to laying down each team so you can kind of see how they stack up going into the draft. That's likely to be out this week. And also, I'm going to tell you about how to find the next one, because the who is the next Nakua? How do we catch the next Nakua? That article should be coming out this week as well. And Professor, I know you've got a lot of stuff
I got
waiting
secret
for
stuff
folks to see. And
well, some of it, you and I got to decide what, my approach to some of these questions that I haven't finished yet. Like I said, I get strayed away. Too many squirrels dancing around the room when I'm doing database building.
but head over to the scienceoffantasyfootball.com. You'll see some great lesson plans from the professor that'll help make you a smarter fantasy football player. Check out my best articles. And then, of course, come back here next week for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
Oh, hey, I think that was